Okay. County Council, was there any reportable actions?
No reportable actions, Chair.
Thank you. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, anyone. Eva, is there any additions or corrections?
Not at this time, Chair.
Great. At this time, is there any member of the public who could speak on any item not on the agenda? Again, I'll ask, is there any member of the public who could speak on any item not on the agenda? Do we have any online?
No hands raised.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our consent calendar. Does any of the board members want to pull any of the items? Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on any of the consent calendar items?
No hands raised.
None online and none in chambers. I'll bring this back to the board for action.
Move to approve the consent is.
Second.
First with Mark, second with John. Roll call, please. Deidre's online.
Mike Labar,
Aye.
Matt Simus, Mark Gonzalez, Deirdre Sullivan,
Aye.
Ken Eklund,
Aye.
Jason Smith, John Bailey, Marvin Borzini.
Aye.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to action item number 4. Consider receiving the July 22nd, 2024 GPP Analytics Water Recycling Agreement Expense Audit. Ara, I hand this to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to welcome with us today is Mr. Julian Metcalf. He's a principal with GPP Analytics and was our lead auditor. This effort began almost a year ago to the day, and so it's the culmination of a lot of work and a lot of effort. And so Mr. Metcalf is here to present GP Analytics findings and recommendations and is able to respond to questions from you all. So are you able to present?
Presentation is not loaded on here, so we're going to try from my laptop. Unless it's, we'll try from my. Thank you. The presentation is not loaded on here, so we're trying from my laptop. Hopefully it's loading for you. Almost full screen. If you give me just a moment, we can have it in true full screen, because that's a little distracting. Sorry about the technical problem. All right, is that working? It's Well, I'll just start with a quick introduction while the slides are getting set up to be effective with the time here. Again, my name is Julian Metcalf with GPP Analytics. You'll see a slide, a few minutes with the rest of the team, Dr. Amara Vibey and Eric Spivak. Oh, perfect. Here we are. There's the rest of the team. As you are likely aware, we were originally engaged by the Auditor Controller's Office, where we have a standing contract to do audits on an on-call basis, and working with the Water Resources Agency to conduct an audit of the agreement. And I'll say it one time here just for the record, but for here on we'll just call it the agreement. It is the amended and restated water recycling agreement between Monterey Regional Water Pollution Control Agency, now Monterey One Water, and Monterey County Water Resources Agency over a 4 fiscal year period. As mentioned earlier, the audit began almost a year ago with an entrance conference. Following the entrance conference, we began our initial phase of the audit, which included interviews with staff, review of digital and physical records, and something we call a risk assessment, where we assess all of our initial observations, rank them on magnitude of likelihood and potential impact, and use that then to draft a memo, a planning memo based on this so that we go into our then planning phase. The basis of these audits rely on evidence. And so the testing phase is really where we go in and we actually test and find documentation and evidence for everything that comes in the audit. The interviews and everything are great foundational context, but all of our conclusions are driven by the evidence that we find. So in the testing phase, which began in October, we spent 4 days on site with Monterey One Water. This is because while they have plenty of things in their financial system, a lot of the supporting records for the audit periods we were looking at were not digitized, so we were looking at paper records and spent time to go through those in person. Following that, there was a period.
Sorry,
Oh,
your slides are not appearing on Zoom at this moment.
oh. Yeah, where, can I take the slides?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Are you sharing your screen?
And all of them are comfortable.
Yes, you should be able to see it on Zoom. Yes, once we get it going.
Just to be useful with everyone's time, the testing phase continued. We had a slight pause in December at the request of Monterey One. They were working on their financial audit and needed more time to get to us and some of our responses to our questions back. We resumed some of that work in January. Can't tell you the exact date off the top of my head, but we provided a draft report after that. There was a period of time when Monterey One wanted to give us more documentation. They felt that certain things hadn't been delivered during the audit, so we obviously obliged and provided more time during that period. And then there's several iterations in the review of the draft. All right, now I'm seeing a video of here, not the slides. And then after those reviews, oh, fantastic. After those reviews, we find ourselves where we are with the final report, which was issued. And you're still not seeing the slideshow. But it is up on here. Okay. Excellent. I'll see full screen. Perfect. And we have the final report, which we're discussing today. So one thing that's important to me at the beginning of every audit report, which often focuses on the negative, to really make sure we do highlight some of the positive things we saw. As you are likely aware, a major part of our testing was on the direct cost between the agreements. And one of those large direct costs is the accounts payable, the payment to vendors for materials and supplies and services. And this is where we did a lot of extensive testing in person to look at the supporting documents. Over the period, we did a random test of over 300 transactions, and for the vast majority of them, were in really good shape, but we didn't see any major problems with them. There's some minor ones which we note in the report, but overall, the accounts payable process and that aspect of the agreement seemed well organized and well documented. Some of the areas which the next findings really begin on are the areas where we saw and identified some problems. There were 4 key findings in this report, and the report then has 3 other findings which are really summary findings that speak to specific questions we were asked in our scope and objectives that reference back to the other 4. So I'll start with the 4 and then talk about the final 3 in summary. The first one focuses on the indirect cost methodology. This part of the methodology, indirect costs, being a cost such as human resources or finances, these overhead costs, which are difficult to directly bill for a service like this, that support that every cost, every head count, and every person and every aspect of their work does have some background cost to. It's very common to have a cost allocation plan in agreements and in multiple types of organizations, and this is no different. The agreement had one which was defined in Appendix J of the agreement. The agreement says you can basically use Exhibit J, or you can use a federally defined compliant indirect cost methodology. Our observation was that Monterey One had done neither. What we did in this analysis was say, let's take Exhibit J and calculate what those costs would have been had they complied with that. And we come to a place where there's a different number based on what we were able to document in the supporting documentation they had available. And this is the difference on the bottom row here of the chart, is the top one shows what was charged, the middle row shows what we calculated, and then the bottom row shows the difference. It totals up to be about $1.1 million. Now, this is not necessarily black and white, and this does live in a gray area somewhat. Exhibit J is labeled as a draft and a sample in various parts of the agreement. To us, it suggests that was the intention to do this or something very similar to it. There are options in the agreement that if either party wants to pursue a different indirect cost methodology where they could, and again, it needs to be compliant with those federal standards that are listed in the agreement. And the methodology that was used, in our opinion, would not have been compliant with those federal requirements, nor was there any documentation about alternative method being agreed upon. And you can see here the different standards, they're really driven from the Office of Budget and Management, and then also Title II CFR Part 200, which is a common section that describes these types of things based in federal code. We did, in that final review with Monterey One, there was a period of time where they had said, well, let us calculate hypothetically what these costs would have been had we done what Exhibit J had said. And we were very attentive to this. They brought up some interesting considerations, which we made sure to include in our report because we wanted to be fair to their perspective. So that's why finding one is quite long, and it reads a little hard because we're trying to show this alternative perspective that they had shared with us, and we wanted to give it the space so that both sides of the story were told. But in the end, our final calculations were based on what was documented and what there's evidence for, and our interpretation of Exhibit J. So in the end, we end up recommending that $1.1 million should be refunded, and both parties really, and this is what's even more important, should agree and document a finalized method for calculating the indirect costs. Otherwise, this type of problem will continue years forward. And both parties then should seek to amend the agreement so that there's also working papers are required to be submitted annually with this, so that the Water Resources Agency can then judge for itself if it believes its Monterey One has been compliant with the agreement and followed through with the methodology that they have committed to and agreed to. Finding 2 of the report focuses on the inconsistent time records. Time billed for the 3 projects is a direct cost, and it's a significant direct cost that the Water Resources Agency pays for. When we went to assess this, just like the accounts payable transactions, we were looking for some type of supporting documentation for the time that was billed. Commonly, when we look at this, when we see payroll records, we'd say, okay, well, there's probably some type of logs available. People were working on assets and infrastructure, and there should be some documentation about the work that was done on them. We do not expect such logs to ever be 100% of the time billed, because there is, in addition to the indirect costs, which are separate, there's some administrative time that folks will use. There's going to be training for staff that may be directly related to a project. There's going to be supervision time and some other paperwork that one might not put down in a log outside of their timesheet. When we spoke with Monterey One about the best documentation that could support the time that they billed, we were directed to their work order system. Their work order system tracks their assets and the hours and costs and time and labor that goes into it. And again, we were not expecting this to be a perfect one-to-one matchup. We were anticipating it to give us a reasonable verification about a majority of the hours. But what we saw were that these 2 records were very inconsistent, which left us in a place where we could not make a determination about the accuracy of the time billed. I'll explain a little bit more. You can see here in the chart just the overall hours that are entered into both systems for the projects. The work order hours entered have improved, and this is something that Monterey One has talked about, that they have been improving their use of this system and the time entered. And so we thought, well, maybe this is just still not everyone's being compliant and putting their time in, so we expected this to be a portion of it, but it gets a little bit more complicated from there. And this is just one day, the final day of our audit period, taken as an example. On the top, you see the time that was entered in the payroll timesheet system. You see 12 employees entering about 22 hours. And then on the work order system, you see 5 employees entering 12 hours. Now, I've taken the names off here to keep them anonymous for the staff so they're not called out in public on it. But we see on the timesheets, only 1 project is billed on the time. And on the work order system, we see 5 different people working on multiple projects at a time and for different hours. Now, it's possible, of course, that there could have been 36 hours of work done and that the top people just didn't put time in the work order system. It's also possible that these were several errors that were made. It's also possible there was less. But because they were so discrepant and there was so little overlap on a regular basis between these hours, we were left in a position where we could not make any determination. You see this a little better here when you see the gray part of the charts. That shows the staff, the total just number of staff, regardless of the hours they entered, who put time in both systems. The blue section are staff who only put time in the timesheets in their payroll system, where, of course, staff members have a more incentive because if they don't put time in their timesheets for payroll, they don't get paid. So there's a direct correlation for staff to be compliant with that. And then the orangish brown color is the staff who put work order time in but no timesheet in information. And so these were staff, and this final year there were 36 staff who did both systems, 21 who only put time in timesheets, and 13 who only put time in work orders. So without being able to make a determination about the time billed, our recommendations really land on recommending that Monterey One write an organization-wide policy regarding time entry. That includes using both of these records to review the discrepancies between either system to make sure that their records are accurate. And then during this period of improving information, have Monterey One provide the Water Resources Agency with monthly timesheet and work order data so that the Water Resources Agency can assess the accuracy of the time being billed to their programs based on both records. And then long term, and this is not a quick fix because it takes time to integrate systems, we recommend that they seek to integrate the time entry system between work order and payroll systems because it would just be simpler for staff to enter it in one place. It would encourage more compliance. The information should be more accurate when they're entering it in one place, and there'll be less discrepancies. And they'll have the same incentive that they would for the payroll system to enter good work order data as well, because it's tied to their wages. Finding 3 focuses on the non-compliance of monthly reporting that's required under the agreement, where the agreement requires Monterey One to provide the Water Resources Agency with monthly financial reporting. It's an important tool for budget control, monitoring, spending, and just general compliance with the intentions of the agreement and the programs that are being administered by Monterey One. We observed that for a 10-month period, 1 month of which falls in our audit period, Monterey One Water was not providing these monthly reports to the Water Resources Agency. While the majority of this time falls outside of our audit scope, we felt it was important to include it, 1, because it was so recent, and then 2, because it was indicative of the nature of the communication problems we saw and some of the communication gaps. When we reviewed emails between both parties and both agencies, we saw there were gaps in communications, long delays, and a desire for more timeliness that would help the Water Resources Agency administer and oversee this contract. We recommend, of course, that Monterey One implement processes to ensure that this monthly reporting is occurring, assign it to specific staff, and because every small finance organization can struggle with succession, make sure there's a succession plan so that when someone comes and goes, that these duties are assigned to them and that there's some clear continuity and responsibility. Our 4th finding is also a long finding like the first. We could have broken this up into several findings, but they all relate back to these issues of accounting practices and limited transparency. The agreement defines the nature of the accounting systems and records that Monterey One is supposed to keep related to the 3 programs. And one of the things it makes clear is that the finances should be segregated from each other. Well, it's a little unclear if they should be segregated from each other, but it is clear that they should be segregated from the rest of Monterey One. During the first of the 4 audit years, the 3 programs actually resided within Monterey One's general fund. This, for the other 3 years, starting in 1920, they moved it to their own separate fund called the Reclamation Fund. So there was a history of it being kept in the general fund, eventually moved into a separate one. The 3 programs, though, were still in a singular fund called the Reclamation Fund, which I'll note in a moment is a problem because within this single fund, they had a pooled cash account where they pooled the cash between the 3 programs. Now, one of the problems with transparency, though, is this was never reported to the Water Resources Agency. You can see in this chart our calculations during the audit from our access to Monterey One's financial system. And on the right, you can see how it was reported to the Water Resources Agency from Monterey One. You'll note that they showed just line items for each program, but they never showed the pooled cash account that they were actually using in their financial system. As a matter of transparency, I think it's important for them to understand how these funds are distributed, and this was never made clear to the Water Resources Agency in the regular reporting from Monterey One. Another area with this is the limitations of the annual reports. And I'll explain in the annual consolidated financial reports, or the ACFRs, there was an error that occurred and was reported in 21-22. This error was something that we had looked at in our draft, and we had attempted to determine the nature of and if who was really due this money. We were not able to, in the end, make a final determination. This is an area where we did get some more information on, and that additional information made it a little less clear as to the origins of the funds and the nature of the error. Both the financial auditor had staff who had turned over at the time and didn't have clear records, and their records then conflicted with the reports we heard back on the reasoning from Monterey One. both basically saying it was the other party who had suggested something be posted and there was a mistake that something should have been posted and not. With that, we didn't feel we could make a determination on the nature of this error. But what it does do is highlight a bigger problem. This error would not have occurred had the three programs been separately audited and treated to the full audit treatment. And I'll explain is even though they end up in the annual report, they are in a section of the report called Other Supplemental Information. And it is a great thing that they put it in there. Some agencies and jurisdictions don't include this information, and there's some limitations. And it's in this thing called a combining statement. And this is information compiled by the financial auditor from their system, but just reported. The financial auditor is not looking at the information in here as any distinct type of funds from the overall agency. The financial auditor in this period was looking at agency-wide finances. And so when they made an audit opinion, they said agency-wide finances, meet these standards with their audit. And so they did not look at it on a fund-by-fund basis because that was not what they were directed to do. They were directed to look at it agency-wide. And so the fact that these programs are reported in the back of the annual report, again, is a good thing that it's there, but it didn't have the same and doesn't have the same audit treatment as if it were one of the audited funds and considered as separate entities. So when this error occurred and it was not clear to either party where the money belonged, they didn't concern themselves with it because that was not their directive to look beyond just the agency-wide balancing of the funds. So I'll jump ahead a little bit and say this is one major driver to our recommendation that Monterey One separately audit these funds. In larger organizations, it's not uncommon to have larger funds, and I wouldn't consider these three programs large funds, but it is a common practice when you get larger to have them separately audited, and each one will report. It could be in the same report, or it could be a separate one, but have each one considered as its own distinct fund in the audit so that you get an opinion about each one, rather than the agency-wide opinion, where, of course, where the $600,000 lies doesn't affect the agency-wide balancing for Monterey One. There's some other problems that we note in this finding related to encumbrances. In this annual reconciliation process that has been occurring, encumbrances were used by Monterey One. This is basically money that they plan to spend on something, but it's our opinion that the budget process really captures any of those plans, and that there's a risk when you're including encumbrances in these calculations of double counting funds. So we recommend, of course, of stopping the practice of including encumbrances and reconciliations. And also the agreement, among many things, doesn't make clear specific reserve amounts for Monterey One to hold. And that's one of the areas where we actually recommend Monterey One, the Water Resources Agency, hold the reserve amounts in a separate restricted cash account of their own based on an industry standard 45 days of working capital as another budget control that the Water Resources Agency can use when overseeing this agreement. Of course, as mentioned earlier, we recommend that Monterey One manage each program in separate funds, that the agreement be modified to speak to this specifically. Have each program individually audited in its audit and considered separately as separate funds. Then use this financial audit as the basis of annual reconciliations. Now, this will delay the time because you have to wait for the audit to finish, but it will delay the time before you can reconcile a previous year's budget because you need to wait for the financial audit to occur. But in doing so, both parties can act on stronger, verified, third-party verified information. Also amend the agreement so that unused funds and unspent money will be issued as a refund every year. This is just a cleaner process because if the Water Resources Agency is holding the reserves, they can receive any unspent funds and consider that in the reserve amounts. And then, of course, moving forward, as they should also stop the process of the pooled cash account, but in doing so should work with the Water Resources Agency to determine how any of the remaining pooled cash is distributed between the three. So that is an agreed upon amount, a one-time redistribution of the pooled cash, and then no more pooled cash in each fund managed separately. As I mentioned, the final three findings are really summary findings in a sense. One question we were asked specifically was, what was the percent, if any, that was overcharged? In earlier versions of this, we had considered other amounts, and we had kept this in here, and the major finding here is based on finding 1. And so this is a continuation related to the indirect cost. We show it here again just to answer this specific question about the percentage. Finding 6 asks about the control environment, because if we look at each finding individually, you could say they're individual one-off problems, but taken as a whole, they speak to what we believe to be weaker controls that had been at least previously established at Monterey 1 to manage the agreement. And then finally, finding 7 looks at the breaches of the agreement, and we ask, how could these breaches have been avoided? With our recommendation, we don't believe things like financial fines make much sense, because then you're just shifting those costs to ratepayers, which would not be appropriate. And so if you can't necessarily fine someone, what kind of mechanisms do you have to have greater compliance with the agreement and build more trust and build some kind of continuity and oversight with the processes and ensure that there is ongoing compliance? And our recommendation here is that the agreement be amended so that there is a clear direction that if there is a disagreement between either party, that those disagreements be promptly brought before the boards so that it can be discussed and aired publicly and addressed quickly, so that these types of issues don't build up over time. Those are the 7 findings. I am happy to answer any questions you may have about the presentation of the report.
Well, thank you, Julianne. We really appreciate getting that independent third-party look at the control systems and what was going on the financial side. So very illuminating. I do want to offer it up to my board members with questions and comments. Mike, I see you're jumping at the...
Yeah, thank you for that report. It's a bit shocking. On your figure 1.2, as you can obviously see, it's 100,000, then 160, then 180, and that only goes up to 21, 22. Is it a safe assumption to assume that 22, 23, and 23, 24 would have gone up exponentially as well, and that there could actually be further monies owed?
I wouldn't want to speculate too much. I would say that inflation and costs going up, it's possible, but truly, we did not evaluate that, and so I don't want to misspeak, because it could be very different and it could have changed.
Let me go to Ken, then John, did you have?
Thank you for the presentation. Could you go back to the slide that's finding 7, breach of agreement? Because it shows, it's kind of what Director Scatini's talking about, but in a different way. It seems like, so I think it's the slide before that. It shows each year, the delta, there's a difference. Yeah, okay. Can you explain that bottom line there, the percent difference from expenses charged? That is going up. That's quadrupled in 4 years. Can you explain what that is?
In a way, I mean, it's their cost, so I don't want to explain for them, but our understanding the rationale for Monterey 1, and they can speak to this better, is that they would suggest and suggested to us that a lot of material and supply costs have increased, chemicals in particular, and so they say that's driving a lot of the costs. But when we look at this, and if it's just the overall expenses, you see that on that top row going from 4.3 million to 6.1. The reason the difference has gone up, though, would also be because their costs have gone up, and then the formulas, and this is all formulaically driven, would change with it. But why it has gone up as a relation to the expense is really related to how they're charging time. And so that's part of the problem, is the formulas do derive from time, partially, for some of the categories. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on the formula, but if the expenses go up with overall, and then I'm jumping back just to this time chart here, And really what you should look at is the blue bar, because this is the time that was charged. This is the payrolls, the main basis of what's being charged for the direct expenses. And the time being charged did go up. And so the time being charged to go up mean you have more FTE in the calculation, and the amount goes up. And you see, I'll go back real fast, because you see ours increase. Our calculation would have increased at the same time based on, actually I should have gone to the front, forgive me. Our calculation goes up, actually no, it goes down a little bit more. Yeah, I was going to say, I thought ours was gradually going up, our calculation of Exhibit J, but it's actually going down during that time period when more time was being entered. So why their calculation, which is really driving the difference here between the two, is going up, it's hard to say what other factors would have gone into their calculation, because this is what we didn't have good supporting work papers for, is the top row. So we had ours, which was based on our calculations of Exhibit J, and then theirs would have increased based on the unknown factors that went into it.
Thank you.
Other board members? Just quickly, I thought in the full audit you had talked about application of FTEs and where they were doing a generic, I think it was 2. Can you elaborate what that component and how it how it related to that finding?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So there were many parts of their assumptions in the hypothetical rebuttal that they sent. So basically, they sent back a model saying, had we done Exhibit J per the agreement, this is what we would have done. And there were some assumptions in there with some placeholders and some static numbers that weren't based on data. And so we rejected those assumptions when we were reviewing our analysis. So that's why it gets kind of layered, because we're talking about a hypothetical analysis after the fact that they gave us, that then we included in the report to try and be fair, but we didn't accept in our analysis. We wanted to explain at least their rationale.
And the second question I had was regarding the finding 4 on the 600,000. And I understand where you're saying is the explanation only made it even more difficult for you to make a judgment on that. But I still, where did the 600,000 go? I mean, was it accurately accounted for, or did it go away? That's where I couldn't figure out either. Is like, there was this number.
Right.
And it was dollars, I would imagine, that came out of our coffers at one point and not accounted for.
Right. So during the period when things were commingled in the general fund, there was this belief, I believe, that a period in which they had talked with their financial auditor, the financial auditor had thought that they were going to be negative on that and suggested you transfer money over to support the general fund, or support the reclamation funds. And we can see that transfer in their financial system. But the explanations for it are very unclear, because the financial auditor said that, and then they said, the Monterey One said they forgot to fix the posting, or the financial auditor was supposed to fix the posting. It was very murky explanations, which may have been accurate, but there was no documentation to really make it clear to us what happened. And we did not feel that there was enough information to truly know. It was in a period where there was poor documentation and not enough to make a strong determination.
That's helpful. And just an observation, so from my understanding, obviously not a financial accountant, but what I'm seeing is overall is just a poor sense of controls. The controls are not good enough to accurately affect the operations and to accurately lay out where all the expenses, where all the revenues were coming from in a way that anyone could look at them. So I've seen in a lot of findings is recommendations to put in proper controls in those mechanisms that will be more transparent and then bring in the trust that is necessary. Is that it?
And I would just clarify, we evaluated controls related to the agreement. So yes, controls related to the agreement, building trust, more transparency and accurate information. And oftentimes in audits, findings really relate to supporting documentation and the lack thereof. And this is another case where better supporting documentation could have added a lot of clarity for all parties.
Okay, no, that's very, very helpful. Any final comments? Mark?
On finding number 2, you talk about the work orders were very inconsistent. You recommended that write an organization reporting system. Is there a standard type system that exists for this, or would M1 create their own?
That's a good question. The off-the-shelf software that they use, as they explained to me, there are options to tie it in for time reporting. So no, they wouldn't have to do it custom. But the reason I caution in this presentation and in the report that it's not a quick thing is because to do it right and to integrate systems, there's almost, in my experience, almost inevitably some type of custom considerations you have to take into place, even if it's off the shelf. Every organization is a little bit different. Implementing something like that just isn't done quickly, and then to do it well, too. So I don't know if it'd be a quick thing by any means.
And what kind of jumps at me too in your presentation is you touched on its accounting practices and lack of transparency. So I just hope that M1 recognizes this and that they agree to make the appropriate changes so that everything's operating properly. But I do appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Anyone else? Do we have someone from M1 who would like to speak?
Good afternoon, Chairman Labar and board members. My name is Tamsin McNary, and I'm the Assistant General Manager for Monterey One Water. I'm here representing Paul Shudo, who couldn't attend today. Monterey One Water has had a long and valued partnership with both the county and WRA for more than 26 years. We're committed to being a transparent and trusted partner, producing over 100 billion gallons of recycled water for agricultural irrigation. While we have a response in the back of the audit report, we appreciate the opportunity to participate in this meeting and to review the expenses associated with the amended and restated water recycling agreement. Monterey One Water annually audits its financial statements and the internal controls that administer our financial reporting. For more than a decade, we have earned recognition from the Government Finance Officers Association for our annual financial statements and practices, along with recognition from the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. Annually, we use independent auditors to test our internal controls. And as we have financed various public work projects, our financial capabilities and integrity have been evaluated by funding institutions like the State of California, US EPA, and the US Bureau of Reclamation. This audit did not look at our overall financial practices and controls, but was a focused assessment of the expenses related to the amended and restated water recycling agreement. We agree that there are learning opportunities, and Monterey One Water is committed to resolving areas where we diverge in the interpretation or opinion of the agreement pertaining to the calculation of the indirect costs. We are committed to clearing up any ambiguities within the agreement, which will be key to ensure that both agencies are confident in the amount that WRA is paying reflects 100% of the annual, both indirect and direct, required to operate and maintain WRA's assets. We have already established staff and leadership working groups which meet monthly to improve relevant processes, address concerns, and identify the best path forward to ensure transparency and equity. We look forward to continuing to work together on behalf of our mission to provide cooperative water solutions. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Since Paul wasn't here, if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to take them and get back to you and answer and address your questions.
Okay. And I do want to express my appreciation for M1W to finally sit down with our agency to form a leadership group to work out these situations. I mean, I disagree with some of the things how you portrayed it. I mean, our audit was very clear on how the agreement was. And I think, as I mentioned, the overall is there is a need for us to work together to tighten up the control systems throughout the system relating to the agreement, the operational, and I'm very happy that we can start working on making sure that the controls for the processing, for the financial systems, for the deliveries that are in place so that everybody can trust that.
Right.
And I know it'll be tough, but we'll work through it and make it better.
Right.
But this does show a lot of places where there's work that needs to be done. And I thank you for being here. Does anyone have any questions for M1? The audit speaks for itself, obviously, but thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to go to the public at this time. Is there any member of the public who can speak on this item? Norm, great to see you.
Thank you, Chair Labar and directors. Norm Groot for Farm Bureau Monterey. And I want to address this from the opportunity that we have of public perception at this point. And what's out there now is $1 million number. And that's obviously very shocking. And I think the calls to our office and the inquiries I've gotten about, is that real, is out there. And we need to figure out how we're going to address this in the public domain, particularly within the ag community, because that's who's paying for a lot of this money and this dollar for projects, programs, whatever the case may be. And so I would like to see, as we move forward, that there's a clear and honest statement of what's going to be done to make sure that this is corrected, first of all, and how we're going to move forward, because the perception right out there is not good. And I think that reflects on this agency, but more so on M1W and what they're trying to do for water supplies and other issues that they're trying to resolve too. It really comes down to trust, and we need to build that trust again. So let's see how we can move forward and make something really quick and really responsive to what is out there already, that $1 million number. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other members of the public to speak on this item? Is there anyone online?
No hands raised.
All right. Hearing, seeing none, I'll bring this back to the board. Any final comments?
Chair
Yeah, go ahead.
Labar, I just want to take a moment again to thank Mr. Metcalf and the GPP team for their work. I'm fairly certain when they started in August of 23, they didn't think they'd be here in August of 24. But it was, it was work well worth the time. To Non-Cam and the staff at the Water Resources Agency for the work and dedication that they brought to it, as well as Rupa Shaw, Auditor Controller with the county, and then ultimately the M1 staff did an extraordinary job of trying to find answers to the questions and really stuck with it. So I appreciate y'all being here today and look forward to the work we'll do together moving forward.
Chair?
Yes.
I'll just add on to that and to Norm's comment that we as the board have been chasing this around, and staff, for 5 years or so, and thank you to Ara and coming on and a priority by the board and leadership at the top of that to really go through this audit process, because it wasn't that ratepayers and lots of people hadn't been bringing up these issues or questions or whatever, but anyhow, it took a little pushing and we had to come to this point, but I think moving forward, we can find a way to make it be transparent as Norm and all ratepayers should be hoping for. I just wanted to say that from the water resources side, as we've been trying to get down this hole for quite a while. Thank you.
And to follow up on that, yeah, thank you so much for all the hard work that everybody's been doing. What I really appreciate was the auditor's recommendations for how to fix this, and I think that our board is going to put a huge priority on working through those things to make sure they happen, because we do owe a serious obligation to the public who's paying for this to make sure that their money is well spent. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes. To piggyback on Mr. Groot's comments, perception, public perception. I think this audit justifies the skepticism that the public, the grower community, our board has had on what has taken place in previous years. And I think the next step into clearing up the issues with the financials is also to look into the water source and source waters and where those waters are going. That's the next step. That's what we have to get into the bottom of, because there's a lot of distrust on where that water is actually going. And in light of the recent law changes in California with SGMA, it's critical that we get as much water as we possibly can.
All right. Thank you, Julian. We very much appreciate that work. And I'll just echo, I really like the way you laid it out and with the recommendations on how you can achieve success in rectifying those. So thank you again for the year-long work. All right. We'll now move on to item number 5, consider.
It's an action item, Chair.
Oh, consider receiving, yes. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll recommend motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Yes, Chair. Mike Labar.
Aye.
Matt Simus. Mark Gonzalez. Deirdre Sullivan.
Aye.
Ken Eklund.
Aye.
Mike Scatini. Jason Smith.
Aye.
John Bailey. Marvin Borzini.
Thank you. We'll now move on to item 5, consider amendment number 1 to the agreement for services with TCP Industrials. We'll go to Manuel.
Good afternoon, Chair and board members. Manuel Saavedra, Associate Water Source Engineer. Today's action, consider approving amendment number 1 to the agreement for services with TCB Industrial, Inc. to increase the dollar amount by $265,000 for a total contract amount to exceed $365,000 to refurbish Unit 2 at the Nacimiento Dam Hydroelectric Power Plant and to provide power plant repair services as needed, and authorize the general manager to execute the amendment. On August 2nd, the Finance Committee recommended board approval of amendment number 1. No prior BOD action. Financial impact. The costs for this amendment are payable from Fund 130. That's the Hydroelectric Plant Operations and Maintenance Fund. Amendment number 1 will increase the agreement amount for turbine overhaul, unit reinstallation, and commissioning for an amount of $282,997. And provide $33,678 for estimated power plant repair services. This past February, the Unit 2 of the power plant failed, and for illustration purposes, this is the generator that failed. And this is the turbine component, which I will reference a little bit later on in my slideshow. We requested price quotes to repair the generator. We received 3, and we selected TCB to complete the repairs. On April 25th, an agreement for service with TCB was executed for an amount of $100,000 and a 3-year term. Staff also noticed issues with the turbine that had been science aware. For cost efficiency, it was decided to also pull the turbine out and inspect it and overhaul it if needed. So we repaired the generator last fiscal year, and the amendment number 1 will complete the turbine overhaul and installation of the unit. The prior overhaul of the turbine was completed in 2003. That was 21 years ago. Normally, industry practice to do an overhaul every 10 to 15 years. So we're past due. Due to the large capital cost, the scope was phased out in 2 fiscal years. As I mentioned, phase 1 that covered the generator, that's been completed. The cost to repair the generator was $48,325, and the cost of a new generator is $180,000. So it's a lot cheaper to repair the existing generator. Phase 2 would include the turbine overhaul, reinstallation, and commissioning, and this cost is estimated to be $282,997, and it would be completed this fiscal year, 24-25. This is just a couple of photos illustrating the work that TCB completed back in April. This is the turbine getting pulled out, and this is the generator that's coming out of the powerhouse. This shows the 2 components, the generator and the turbine. Unit 2 will be reinstalled after September 30th. That's when we have permission from NCPA to do a non-emergency shutdown. Basically, between May and September, we cannot do a maintenance shutdown. Those are the peak energy demand months. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Manuel. Board members, John?
Yeah, Manuel, thank you. I brought this up at ResOp. I've been talking about this at ResOp for 20 years, of the maintenance of that reservoirs, of the projects that are very important to this valley, and the lack of, not by any means by you, but just funding. And it's amazing that we can build projects, but we never have the funding to take care of them. And this is pretty important. And I've seen that power plant, from, they used to have a wood setup to pick out the generator in the old system before the new hydraulic one. I mean, it was quite an effort to pull any of those, the generators or the turbines out.
Right.
This is work that is well overdone. I mean, overdue. And we should have, like I said, done it 10 years ago. But we have a tendency to wait till it's broken, then we'll go and spend it. I hope with foresight now that we're generating income off it, that we can set some aside so we don't have to wait another 21 years. I think you'll be finally retired by then. I know you keep coming back. But we're leaving a lot of money on the table at that reservoir, because when we do our winter releases, we release 70 CFS for our winter releases for fish flows. Yet the generator is generator 1 that we do minimal releases.
Generator 2,
Generator
which is the one that's broken right now.
But we can only run out 35 CFS through generator 2.
25 CF.
25 CFS. So out of the 60, we're letting go 45 through and not generating any income out of that whatsoever. I hope one day that we can generate 100% of the water released out in Nacimiento and get money out of it. I know that's a whole different subject, but this is well overdue, and we need to take better care of our projects down there. Thank you, Manuel.
Other board members?
I think this came before the Finance Committee, I think it was, if I remember right. One of the questions is, I know we asked that it be put in a presentation on consent, was do you have any idea what the cost would be to replace a generator?
Yes, we received a price quote for a new generator costs $180,000.
Replace one, okay. So that kind of goes to the effect of what John was just talking about. We want it here so there's a projected cost that we could start setting aside so that when we run into the situation, we can easily replace instead of trying to repair. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted it as a presentation. But thank you, appreciate it.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, Manuel, I think it was at last year's workshop, strategic workshop, you gave us a presentation on actually upgrading that unit to be able to accommodate the entire flow that's coming through that. What was that figure?
Yes, in 2021, we hired a consultant to do a feasibility study. And we looked at different units, and the one that we found would operate around 75 CFS. The cost for that was around $1.2 million, plus any permitting issues. And also, if I can say this, that would trigger additional requirements. One would be to the FERC license exception that we have, that would need to be revisited. Plus, there'll be some, on the PG&E side, some upgrades that will be needed. In 2018, there was a study done, and the cost to upgrade the PG&E distribution line was around 1.2 or so. So there will be additional cost besides the cost of the equipment.
Okay, well, so you don't run that out. I mean, you run it from a different generator, so just getting it to the line is, because obviously we have the capacity to do, I don't know what we're doing, 400 CFS is going through there, whatever it is, where we're getting most of our money. So, but just to get it from a new generator to that, in addition to the cost of the physical thing, all the permitting and all that other stuff would be an additional 1.5?
Yeah, those are 2018 figures. And again, the study was done in 2018, and that was one of the requirements, that if we change the generator, they would impose these requirements on us.
Okay, thank you.
If I can ask, so if we change the generator but maintain the size, not increase output, we would not have to go through the other requirements that you just talked about, correct?
Right. If it's like replacement, yes, we don't need to do any upgrades on the PG&E side.
We maintain the same size, we're okay. So realistically, it'd be cheaper just to maintain the same size, because look how long it would take. Matt, you could probably figure that out quick, but how long it'd take us to recoup that versus just replace it. So, thank you.
All right, is there any member of the public to speak on this item?
No hands raised.
None in chambers. I'll bring this back to council, or to board for action.
Make a motion to accept?
Second.
First with John, second with Mark. Roll call, please.
Mike Labar.
Aye.
Matt Simus. Mark Gonzalez. Deirdre Sullivan.
Aye.
Aye.
Mike Scatini. Jason Smith.
Aye.
Sean Bailey.
Aye.
Marvin Borzini.
All right, thank you. Now move on to item 6, which will be considering accepting donations on some monitoring wells, authorization to the general manager, and I will hand this over to Amy.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Labar and members of the board. This is Amy Woodrow, Senior Hydrologist, and this item, I will read through it for the record for the initial slide here. We have 3 parts. We're asking the directors to consider recommending that the Board of Supervisors of the Monterey County Water Resources Agency approve and authorize the general manager of the Water Resources Agency to accept donation of monitoring wells DA1 valued at $436,645, DA3 valued at $475,954, and ISW1 valued at $163,352 from the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency, to authorize the general manager of the Water Resources Agency to enter into agreements to convey ownership in monitoring wells DA1, DA3, and ISW1, and to authorize the Water Resources Agency to use monitoring wells DA1, DA3, and ISW1 for implementation of its groundwater monitoring program. There isn't any prior committee or board action related to this item today. And just as some background, leading into this, the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency works closely with the Water Resources Agency for data collection from the agency's groundwater monitoring network. We work closely with the SVB GSA, and they have identified data gaps in the agency's existing monitoring network from the perspective of the SVB GSA's regulatory requirements. So the SVB GSA monitors in some different geographic spaces than the agency has historically. So there are some data gaps that have been identified from their perspective. And so SVB GSA has, during 2023, done a lot of work to construct some new groundwater monitoring wells to fill in those data gaps and expand the existing monitoring network. And this work was completed by the GSA using grant funds. The proposal before you today is for the SVB GSA to donate 3 of the monitoring wells that have been installed to the agency. The Agency Board of Supervisors is authorized to accept donations of this nature that serve a public purpose. In this case, that purpose is monitoring of groundwater conditions to inform management of water resources throughout the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. So to complete this, the agency and the SVB GSA would enter into an agreement for each, specific to each monitoring well, that would convey ownership of the monitoring well to the Water Resources Agency. And language in those agreements also includes maintenance of those wells and reporting responsibilities for the agency. And those draft agreements were included as part of your agenda packet for this item. Specifically, we're talking about 3 monitoring wells today that are proposed to be donated to the agency. 2 of them are constructed so that they monitor the deep aquifers in the 180 or 400-foot aquifer subbasin. And 1 is a shallow well that's intended to monitor the interaction between surface water and groundwater. And the figure here on the screen shows the entirety of wells that the agency works with the Salinas Valley Basin GSA to provide groundwater level or water quality monitoring data. The 3 locations with the yellow stars that you can see in the sort of the northern part of the basin there, those are the 3 locations of the wells that we are talking about today that could be transferred for donation. And they're named in the same way that was referred to in the action. The ISW is the interconnected surface water well, the shallow one. The other 2 are the wells that monitor the deep aquifers. And in terms of financial impact, these monitoring wells will require long-term maintenance, and that would be the responsibility of the agency per the agreements that we're discussing. Currently, the agency typically does maintenance on monitoring wells on roughly a 10-year basis. There have historically been some lags in that. We've been working hard over the last 3 or 4 years to catch up on things. But generally speaking, we can anticipate between $5,000 and $8,000 per well that would be spent on that kind of rotating every 10 years basis for routine maintenance. If something more serious were to happen, the costs would increase. But these are not wells that are being pumped regularly. They're small, just for monitoring groundwater levels or collecting water quality samples. So there's they're minimal in terms of infrastructure that can be damaged easily. Historically, funding for the well maintenance has come from funds 111 and 116. And as discussed in your board report, donations of this nature do need to be reported per the Fair Political Practices Commission requirements, which is why there is the specific information about the fair market value of each of the monitoring wells. And that was established based on the costs that the SVB GSA incurred, both for drilling and then associated consultant or staff costs dealing with construction of the wells. So that represents the costs that went into installing that infrastructure. And just to wrap things up, I won't read through this in detail, but this action is generally consistent with a number of the different goals and strategies in the agency's strategic plan related to data collection and collaboration with groundwater sustainability agencies. And I will spare you reading through the whole action again, but again, we're looking for the board to recommend that the Board of Supervisors complete these 3 actions related to accepting donation of the monitoring wells. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Board members, John?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And I guess I always worry about getting handouts or things donated. I worry about what it may cost down the road. And you got your costs, but I'd sure like to see some sort of wording with this agreement that if there was a catastrophic event at any of these wells, that we wouldn't be responsible for redrilling, or that if it was an act of God, that they're just gone. And I feel that it wouldn't be our responsibility to redrill if something happened. So I'm in favor of this with that caveat that if there was a catastrophic act of God with these 3 monitoring wells, that it's not our responsibility to redrill.
Kelly?
Ara just whispered to me, what does the agreement say about that? And I said, Ara, I need to pull up the agreement. I don't remember. I have a lot of agreements rumbling around in my head. I could take a quick look. You all are considering this today to make a recommendation to the supervisors. So if the board is on board with that, it can be part of your recommendation. If you give me in a minute, or Amy might know offhand. And if not, I can take a quick look too.
Yeah, the agreement does not specifically, it doesn't address who would be responsible, for just like destroying or dealing with a well that was destroyed under the circumstances like Director Bailey has referred to. So that's something that we could perhaps revisit the language before it goes to the supervisors.
Okay.
And
Mark?
John, you said all 3. Any one of the 3 is damaged, or all 3 have to be damaged?
What I'm saying is the 3 are in different locales. You got Blackie Road, you got Laguna, and the 3rd one. You could have a catastrophic, let's just use the 89 earthquake. Wells were damaged to the point that they weren't worth anything after that. I don't know how these were drilled. I watched one getting drilled because it was right down the road from me, but it's great getting free things. I just don't feel it would be in our best interests at the agency to be responsible for a catastrophic act of God down the road, to go out there and drill a well 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
And I'm not opposed to your idea, but I'm just, clarity is it, you would have to all 3 of them, or just any one?
One as individual,
Got it.
all 3
Okay.
getting donated to us. If one collapses, if 2 collapse, we wouldn't be responsible. They're gone. That's all. That's one less monitoring well.
Well, and when you say we wouldn't be responsible, do you mean to destroy the well or to have to drill a new monitoring well?
To have to drill a new monitoring well.
That obligation doesn't exist in the agreement. The SVB GSA received grant monies to do the work. They've done it, and now they're proposing to transfer it to us. We are in charge of, we would be responsible for maintenance, but there's no obligation that we would have to re-drill a monitoring well if there's a catastrophic event.
if it's, I just don't want there any assumption that we take over. It's your well, you need to, we're using this for monitoring because they are in areas that they don't have monitoring wells already. So, well, it's gone now. Can you guys drill another one? Well, we had this one donated to us. So that's all, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Pretty clear.
Through the chair. Yeah, I think what Kelly's saying is, it's our well. We're not going to require ourselves to replace it. Somebody gave it to us, so if we lose it, we don't have it anymore. But it belongs to us, so it has to be maintained. So really, the only cost I see for us is, yeah, that occasional, or that once every 10 year, $5,000 to $8,000 or something. And I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any way you could put language in there. Again, we don't require any monitoring wells to be replaced, do we? I mean, we're using
Unless there's
old
grant
wells.
language to the contrary, it's up to us. It's within the agency's discretion. And per this agreement, which I've pulled up and skimmed through now, we would be responsible for maintenance and destruction. But there's no added requirement that we would have to re-drill, and I don't think that language needs to be in there. So.
I just want to make sure that we aren't on the hook.
Gotcha.
No,
We would not.
yeah. And that's extremely reasonable. And now we have clarification. Matt?
Amy, I'm just curious, are there more wells coming down the pipeline for monitoring? Do they have additional wells being drilled?
Yes, there are. I believe there are, I think, at least 10 that are queued up over the next year or so. So we'll probably, there's a chance we'll be seeing more of these before the board.
Are there any tax implications with this?
I can't speak specifically to the tax implications, but I did work with NON on, I know she spoke with the Auditor Controller's Office in terms of determining what we would need to do to establish these as assets. So we've looked into that. I don't have any additional details.
I know when you drill a well, you get a well, they reassess the value of your land, and I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, but we're not paying taxes on our well. I mean, and it's government to government. I'm interested that we have to actually report to the fair political practice people, because basically that is when normally a private person or entity, donates something to us, not just another government agency, but whatever.
Okay, other than what we've heard from the board members is if there are some more of these wells coming down, we need to just figure out how that is going to be budgeted out for the maintenance portion, what we can have maybe at the next strategic meeting we have on our budget, looking at that down the line. Is there any member of the public who speak on this item?
No hands raised.
And none in chambers. I'll bring this back to board for action.
Move to approve.
Second.
First with Jason, second with John. Roll call, please.
Mike Labar.
Aye.
Matt Simas.
Aye.
Mark Gonzalez.
Aye.
Deirdre Sullivan.
Aye.
Ken Eklund.
Aye.
Mike Scatini. Jason Smith.
Aye.
John Bailey. Marvin Borzini.
All right, thank you, everyone. And we'll now move on to item 7. Consider recommending that the Board of Supervisors of the Monterey County Water Resource Agency repeal ordinance numbers 3660, 3717, and 3718. Adopt a resolution implementing the groundwater monitoring program manual and provide direction to staff as appropriate. Is this you, Ara?
Yeah, this will be a tag team presentation. Eva, can I be present-ish?
I'm sorry?
Can I present?
You would.
I'm on the Zoom. There we go. Thank you. All right. Very good. So, going to recap presentation that you all have heard certainly parts of before, but it's just for folks who might be tuning in for the first time, just to help ensure that we've got a common understanding of what we're doing and maybe more specifically what we're not doing today. And so today's presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin, a broad overview about the agency's groundwater monitoring history, about SGMA and the new regulatory paradigm, a bit about the Resources Agency Groundwater Monitoring Program, and the expansion of GEMS, the Groundwater Extraction Monitoring System. It's that conversation that has really catalyzed where we are today. Lastly, we'll talk, bringing it all together, how does the GEMS expansion fit with the overall groundwater monitoring program, and then the next steps. So the Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin is a very large area, approximately 530,000 acres. There's about 250,000 people living in it, and it supports, farm gate value of approximately a $4 billion ag industry, much greater than that when you think about the multipliers. It extends from a political boundary in the South County, where we meet the San Luis Obispo County line, and the physical boundary that is the Pacific Ocean in the north. The agency's history in groundwater monitoring is extensive. The agency began doing groundwater elevation monitoring at its formation in the 1940s. Groundwater quality monitoring and seawater intrusion mapping began in the 60s. In the 1990s, the agency and others saw fit to create the groundwater extraction management system, which turned out to be quite a fortuitous decision when you think about the implementation of SGMA 20 years later. And of course, through the 2010s, we've been collaborating with the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency, as well as others such as Marina Coast, in the implementation of GSPs, or groundwater sustainability plans. The agency set about and established this program back in the 90s for its own purposes. SGMA came along and really, changed the way everyone in the state looks at groundwater and groundwater monitoring in particular. We talk about SGMA. It's in fact 3 different laws that were signed into effect in 2014. And at the highest level, it mandates groundwater sustainability by 2040 or 2042, depending on basin/sub-basin characteristics. It assigned to the Department of Water Resources responsibility to establish and prioritize groundwater basins. There are 5 in the County of Monterey. It assigned to DWR the ability to approve plans and to monitor progress, and then ultimately to determine sustainability. And so the Department of Water Resources, in essence, stands as our judge and jury going forward. SGMA also allowed for the formation of local governance, and that, I think, was a very important decision. And so recognizing that, one-size-fits-all solutions aren't going to work in something as varied as groundwater. So in the county, we've got 6 GSAs. It mandated the development of groundwater sustainability plans. The Salinas Valley Basin administers 6 of these, all of which have been approved by DWR. And of course, in terms of being able to determine sustainability and inform groundwater sustainability plans, which are reviewed on a 5-year cycle, in essence, it requires the monitoring of groundwater levels, quality, and usage. Groundwater monitoring program, what we're seeking to establish here is just one cohesive monitoring program. The agency's done a lot of different things over a lot of different decades, but we haven't ever brought it all together under one roof, if you will. in bringing it all together and trying to create opportunities to provide service to others like the Salinas Valley Basin, GSA, folks are really looking to leverage the 75 years of experience that the agency has. Our work in trying to bring this all together advances agency strategic planning goals, Goal B for planning and new project strategies, Goal C for financial sustainability, Goal D for core service strategies. And really, we're aiming here to support the efforts of the SVB. We're looking to create opportunities to consolidate monitoring efforts under one entity to the extent that we might be able to improve efficiencies and reduce costs. And so all of this isn't going to happen at once, and I'll talk about priorities a little bit more. So while the agency has, since its formation, the ability to monitor, throughout the county, and the new ordinance would confirm that authority, really what we're talking about here is focusing in on the Salinas Valley Basin for the purposes of providing support and service to the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We're not talking about working in, today in areas outside of that or taking over anything that any other agency is currently administering with respect, but we are looking for opportunities to work with others. That could include environmental health, that could include, for example, Preservation Inc. and their work on the Regional Water Quality Control Board requirements, and it could include GSAs outside of the Salinas Valley Basin. All of this would be contingent on one of those entities responsible for groundwater management approaching the agency and requesting service, and then ultimately the agency, considering that request and the directors and the supervisors, recommending and adopting approval. So there'd be a lot of steps along the way, but it's clear to understand what we're trying to create is an opportunity. It doesn't mean we're trying to push into any space where we currently aren't working. The current work that we do is under 3 existing ordinances. It does make, understanding the authorities a bit, challenging. And those ordinances, when adapted at those times for our own purposes, in many ways are very specific, right? And so what we are trying to do now is create an administrative structure that would work through a series of documents and authorities to, in essence, just recognizing that as we move forward with SGMA, the future of SGMA is going to be informed largely, in 3 different ways. It's going to be informed by what we're learning locally and regionally. It's going to be informed by decisions of the courts, and we're beginning to see that play out in the San Joaquin Valley, and it's going to be informed by future decisions of the legislature. And so we're trying to create an administrative structure here that can adapt to changes that we know will come, but not trying to predict what we think those changes will be. And then also recognizing, to the extent that the agency may provide services to other GSAs beyond the Salinas Valley Basin, their needs may be different, and so we want to be able to be responsive to that going forward. We also propose to establish a Prop 26 regulatory fee to help cover these costs, and so this is something that is new, and I'll talk a bit more in detail on that. And of course, this is all about, at this time, supporting the SVB GEMS expansion request. The boundaries that the state created some years ago don't align, and I'll illustrate that a bit. So we continue to work with the Salinas Valley Basin GSA, collaborating to help them meet the regulatory requirements of SGMA. We have met with stakeholders for a year now and more, and continue to do so. Our outreach efforts, of course, within the agency, we've been before the Planning Committee, Personnel Administration Committee, we've been before the directors and the supervisors. We've done presentations for the SVB board and then for various organized stakeholders as well. That whole effort, I find has been very constructive and very helpful, and I think the ordinance that we're looking at today is much better than what we initially presented as a draft back in May, and so I appreciate all of the thought and constructive comments that we've received along the way. So the kind of the why the GEMS expansion piece, as I had mentioned, we're trying to meet the regulatory collection needs of the SVB. The GSPs get evaluated every 5 years. The 18400 subbasin is up first in January of 2025. The other subbasins come up in January of 27. And so being able to respond to DWR's what they call recommended corrective actions, and more specifically as they apply to the 18400 is part of what's been spurring us on this past year and more in terms of this work. And so what we're aiming to do initially is to align the existing GEMS boundary, which was created for our own purposes again back in the 90s, with the boundaries that DWR in its infinite wisdom described approximately 10 years ago. So the red circles highlight geographically those areas where expansion will occur. It's a big project, and so it's not a project that we're looking to implement overnight. We need to start sometime, and November 1, 2024 is when we propose to start, but we recognize it will take some years to fully implement all of this. And so where do we begin? We'll prioritize in the 18400 due to its shortened evaluation timeline. We will focus on the registration of unregistered wells in those circled places, because if we don't know they're there, we can't monitor them. We will focus on the new extraction reporting, and then we will, as we move through the coming years, continue to look for opportunities to enhance both kind of the efficiencies of the program as well as our ability to cooperate with other agencies. So what changes are being planned currently? So well registration. Under the existing GEMS program, wells with a discharge pipe smaller than 3 inches did not need to register. But under expansion, all wells will need to register. So what we are working towards is not requiring or having known wells re-register. So we're combing through our existing databases to try to minimize any, repetitive motion there. And then, as has been the case, any changes to wells, ownership, repair, modification, destruction, those changes will need to be reported to us, and we will work with environmental health to try to make sure that our processes are working well together, because they're responsible for the permitting of many of those changes. There was the question of definition of a well. And so a well means any artificial excavation constructed by any method for purposes of extracting water from or injecting water into the underground. So this includes abandoned wells, inactive wells, monitoring wells, and observation wells. And we also talk about what it does not include. So oil and gas, geothermal wells, wells used for the purposes of dewatering excavation, stabilizing hillsides, cathodic protection, test wells or dry wells. And these definitions are built on existing definitions that are held both by DWR as well as the Monterey County Code. And so we wanted very much to make sure that our definition of well aligned with other existing definitions of wells. On extraction reporting, it's going to be to begin reporting in those new areas that we highlighted in the circles earlier. Again, with the existing program, anything smaller than 3 inches need not report. Under SGMA, the standard is a little different, and so it's defined by a volume, so 2 acre-feet per year, and that is standard established by SGMA, and one that could be changed potentially in the future, but at least as a starting point, one that we will propose to adhere to. And then just, again, looking for enhancements to the existing program, shifting the reporting time frame to better align with DWR's needs, and looking for the implementation of technology and devices as we move forward that can reduce the burden of the program and ultimately the costs. So just to summarize, expansion is to meet the regulatory needs of the SVB for data collection within their jurisdiction. We're not looking at this stage to be working outside of the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. We will be requiring registration of wells that have not been previously registered. There will be new reporting requirements. We will strive for improved processes and greater efficiencies and trying to create the opportunity to meet future needs. And so how does that all fit together in terms of the administrative structure? So the ordinance itself would be really trying to do three things, right? So affirming the agency's authority to perform groundwater monitoring throughout the county, establishing an opportunity for other entities with groundwater regulatory responsibilities to request services from the agency, and to establish a new regulatory fee to support the groundwater monitoring program. Those are, when you distill it down, those are its three core functions. So the new cost allocation approach in recovery is a little different. Historically, the agency has allocated costs on a per acre basis for the most part. In this proposal, we are putting forward the idea of allocating on a per well basis. And this is really in the simple recognition that the monitoring efforts that are driving the work that needs to be performed, really driven by the number of wells, not the number of acres. And so, in its simplest form, if there were no wells, there would be no monitoring, there wouldn't be a fee. And so we are looking to establish this under Prop 26. Prop 26 essentially requires that any fee we establish be aligned with the services that are being provided. And again, because these services are provided to develop monitoring for wells, we are proposing to establish the fee on a per well basis. So the ordinance establishes broad authority for the agency. What we would envision is establishing a service agreement with the Salinas Valley Basin GSA, kind of to deal with the base terms and conditions. I think the thing that most are interested in is what work specifically is being proposed to be done. And we would look to the SVB to provide us that information, and whether we call it a task order, an exhibit, at least on an annual basis, some sort of written document that describes the specific work that they're proposing. And then we would incorporate that work and then develop a proposed cost and budget. And there'll be a cycle to this. The SVB, through their governance structure, would be establishing the kinds of work that needs to be done. Then we, through our budgeting process, would be evaluating that and ultimately making decisions and recommendations to move forward. That ultimately leading to what the supervisors would adopt, as a resolution to approve the agency work, approve the budget, and then the annual regulatory fee. And so we're trying to build in a lot of opportunity for stakeholders in the public to participate. So next steps, continuing to work with the SVB, and I think an important piece to all of this, and before you for consideration today, is this groundwater monitoring regulatory program manual, which is describing all of the work that we are proposing to wrap up into this single program. And then ultimately, that's the basis for the Nexus study. That work there has begun. And that will help inform, what our regulatory fee will be initially. So the proposed timeline has changed a little bit. We're here today for your consideration of a recommendation to the supervisors. The dates for the ordinance readings before the supervisors have shifted 1 week. So earlier we had aimed for September 10th, and now it will be September 17th and October 1st. And again, the big driver here being the goal of implementing these new registration and reporting requirements by the 1st of November. And so I will pause there for any questions, and then we'll ask Kelly to review some of the more recent changes in the ordinance itself, and then Amy to review some of the more recent changes in the manual itself. And they too are available for any questions.
Any questions before we continue, John?
Yep. It's amazing. We've been doing this project since the 40s of doing groundwater testing and monitoring. Yet now the state gets involved, and now they want us to play by their rules. And yet we've been doing it, we're probably the only water agency that's been doing it in the state, our way. And I'm concerned about the cost of changing over from the way we used to do it, giving them the year previous results. Now they want everything up to date. The jumping it through hoops, I guess I wanted to say that government loves making people do. Sometimes I like a little pushback. I know I'm probably the minority there, but I caution us in regulatory program costs. We're getting regulated out of the state of California. Farmers in general. Everything out of Sacramento is a regulatory fee, and they keep on imposing it. You have people now going to Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington to grow crops because they can't afford to grow them here because of regulatory fees, let alone Mexico, where you can grow year-round produce the same way as we do here. So I just caution, the more regulatory fees that we continue to burden our ag businesses on, not only in this area, but throughout the state, you're going to drive them away. And not only will you cause a financial problem with those businesses, but all of a sudden people won't have the jobs that we provide. So I just, like I said, I worry about costs in the future. So just be leery of that. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, and certainly the state has made it difficult for agriculture to compete with even our neighboring states. I think Perrette Harmon may be on today as well. One of the things that she and I have both been keenly interested in is, trying our darndest to look for efficiencies where we can, and to try to minimize, to avoid any duplication of service and to try to minimize the program costs going forward. And so that has been in the fore of our minds, and, will continue to be.
All right, any other board members have any questions before we go on?
Yeah, I'm going to, like Ara said, go over, there are really limited changes since the ordinance was before this board last month. And I want to reiterate Ara's statement with regard to the stakeholder input on the ordinance. We received numerous thoughts from stakeholders on ordinance language, and it was all very helpful, and I think it aided to putting a very good product before you today. So, there we go. So there's really only 3 changes, and I'll go over them briefly. If you have any questions, let me know. The first change is really quite simple. It's to the well registration section, and this subsection E speaks to the agency reaching out to well owners to basically request registration. And before, it was just the agency reaching out using the U.S. mail. What we've added is or other electronic means, just to have some leeway for how the agency gets its messaging out and its request out. The next change is to the groundwater extraction reporting section of the ordinance, and it's a subsection F. And this section speaks to when there's issues with approved measuring equipment. This isn't redlined. The highlighted language is new. And what it said before was in the first highlighted section, it was 1 week of failure. And then in the second highlighted section, it was requiring the well operator or owner to address it within 2 weeks. So as you can see before you now, the highlighted section really have added some time into this process. And this was through stakeholder comments, really people who actually own and operate wells, that this is a much more workable and realistic time frame for addressing these issues. So we appreciated that and put these longer timelines into this subsection F. And then the last change is speaking to the fee. The section 10 of the ordinance lays out our authority and our intent to basically require a regulatory fee under Prop 26 for the the monitoring program that the agency has been providing and will be expanding if this all goes forward and gets approved. And what we've added is this highlighted section to make clear that basically the purpose of this ordinance is for monitoring the regulatory fee, and that we want to be clear that this will be done on a per well basis, and it won't be based on extraction. It won't be based on extraction amounts. It's going to be per well, and the fee is going to be per Prop 26 for the staff time in providing this program. So those are the 3 changes highlighted there, and I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions on any of those updates?
Board members? I appreciate you including the stakeholder input like that. All right, Amy is next. Amy?
I do. Yes. Good afternoon again. Have just a few revisions that I will share that were things that have changed in the groundwater regulatory program manual. There are a few definitions that were added in section 2 that are related to some language that's included later in the extraction reporting section. So I've highlighted in yellow here a couple of, I think there were 5 definitions that were added. Continuing down on the well registration, there was some language added to section 3.2 just to clarify that, as Ara stated, people who have currently registered wells with the agency will not have to re-register their wells, but that the agency may reach out to them to request verification of data that we have on file just to make sure that what we have is current. So just to clarify that part of the well registration process. And then the additional kind of more substantive changes are in section 4.3, which is related to the groundwater extraction monitoring. This was feedback we received from stakeholders as well, related specifically to individuals who may choose to use a flow meter as the method to report their extraction or to monitor their groundwater extractions. We increased the frequency decrease the frequency of how often the flow meter would need to be tested. It was annually in the first couple iterations of the manual. That's been increased to a 5-year recurrence frequency for flow meter testing. We've added a definition here of a qualified individual, and this is language that is mirrored very closely on requirements from the State Water Resources Control Board. A lot of the feedback we received was that people are already having to comply with and report to the state board for different programs separate from what the agency is looking for, but that we should try to align the methods and methodologies and requirements in this manual with what is required by the state board. So this language about qualified individuals who can do flow meter testing is directly based on that information from the state board. In subsection B here, we removed specifications about installation of flow meters and pipe distances and different ratios of that, and just simplified it to flow meters must be installed per manufacturer instructions. The feedback we received was that manufacturers have very clear information sort of for each model or different type of flow meter that's out there, and that rather than trying to have specific requirements in the manual, we just defer to what's required by the manufacturer. And then we also changed this item in subsection C related to the accuracy of flow meter readings, and went from a 5%, sort of plus or minus 5%, to plus or minus 10% after installation. So that was, again, related to feedback we received through meetings with stakeholders. And that wraps up the changes that were made to the manual.
Thank you, Amy. Just quickly again, originally you had plus or minus 5%, and you went to 10% due to feedback?
That's correct.
Okay. And That was the only one that actually caught my attention.
Yeah, I think this was another one of those examples where folks were requesting that we build in consistency with the state board standards, as opposed to having a standard that's different than theirs.
Gotcha.
They're operating in different regions and whatnot, and so just try to keep the rules of the road the same as we can.
I know. It's just, I have a real problem on the accuracy and when it comes to actually measuring the quantities of water flowing through something. And we're saying that from the manufacturer, it's coming out at 2%, but we'll allow up to now 10%. And if the state is allowing that, I agree with it, but that is a huge, the amount of discrepancy when it comes to what we're trying to do and what the state is allowing in their documents, 10% is huge, right? I mean, we're trying to help the GSA balance the basins. And so sorry to be on my soapbox, but that frustrates me. I wish we have better controls when it comes to the quantity of waters that are being moved through, and that helps us all. Any other questions from any of the board members or comments before I go to public? Is there any member of the public like to speak on this item?
Chair, maybe invite Brett too, if you'd like to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brett. Let me take Norm, and then Brett, I will bring you up. Norm, please.
Okay, thank you. Norm Group for Farm Bureau Monterey. I first want to thank Ara and the team here for the collaboration and the opportunity to work together to get a pretty solid document together. I think we've done a really good job as a community putting this together, and I appreciate that the suggestions that we made were taken and added. I think that speaks to the larger cooperation between the Groundwater Sustainability Agency as well as this agency moving forward, and understanding that they are state requirements that have changed this paradigm somewhat because of SGMA. I think it's great that we're finally working closer together and working towards an advancement of a solution. I think where I want to express some issues that I'm hearing, some comments that I'm hearing, is that we're asking well owners at this point to take a leap of faith on this ordinance when they have no idea what this regulatory fee will be. And I understand that's coming, but it makes a big difference whether it's $5 per well or $500 per well. And I think with the costs of what we're facing on regulatory compliance and all the associated costs that the state is putting on related to water, air, environment, all the other requirements that are coming down. And just as an example, our organization helped fund a study back in 2018 that noted in the decade prior to that, regulatory cost compliance went up 795%. And so we're looking at some pretty astronomical numbers, and particularly for an ag economy that this year is not that great compared to last year, which was also not that great. So we're looking at 2 years now of challenging economy for ag producers. So I think we're asking for that leap of faith and approving this ordinance and moving forward with it, which is a solid document, as I said. But I think we're also going to be hopefully very collaborative when we come up with the results of the study and what that regulatory fee will be per well. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. And now let's go to Perrette. I apologize, Perrette, for not going to you first.
No problem at all. Good afternoon, Chair and the directors. I want to echo the incredible village mentality that went into this work. I'm going to paraphrase, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to come up with a great ordinance and all of the documents that are in front of you included in the board packet. So my hat goes off to everyone who's been involved, starting with the stakeholders. Their engagement and input was just incredible. And then Ara and Kelly and all of the staff of both agencies. And I know there is what Norm said, leap of faith. I recognize that. My message to you is there's things we cannot control, and there are things we can. So Ara and we have done a lot of work at raising every rock and looking under that and looking what we can do differently to keep the costs down. And sometimes maybe it's not money, it could be time. So by not asking our stakeholders, the groundwater users, to duplicate the efforts. We can maybe give back to them. If we can't give back money, we can give back half an hour time a month or something of similar. And then we are inviting new participants to the program by expanding it. It's not just that. There's going to be small water systems that now need to report. And so maybe economies of scale will help to balance the budget and keep the fees very reasonable. But definitely I'm here to continue the work with all of you, and thank you in advance. It's been a great process so far.
Thank you, Paret. We've also really appreciated the cooperation of your agency too. I think that's a model that other counties and other GSAs could look to and emulate. Any other questions before, or let me finish. Is there any other members of the public that speak on this item?
Thomas Versick.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you, Chair LaBarre. Tom Versick speaking. I sent a letter. I'm not going to repeat what's in it. I did note in your general manager's presentation says that outreach would presumably continue. So I do hope that if I am misreading the words of the proposed ordinance, or I'm misreading the words in the manual, that I will hear that maybe I missed something and maybe my concerns are really not that they're not important, but I'm misreading. And perhaps there is a little bit more assurance in these documents than what I see. So I'm encouraged by the direction, and I think both general managers have done an outstanding job trying to do the best they can. And I hope to take at absolute face value the idea that whichever way it comes out, that the reporters, my clients, ag people, will not have to report two different ways with potentially two different sets of numbers to the state board and to GEMS. And one last thing about the fee study to come is that I hope it identifies which assessment the current GEMS is being financed from, and how whatever that amount from whatever source will or will not be offset by the Prop 26 fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other members of the public online?
Nancy Isaacson.
Nancy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nancy Isaacson, Salinas Valley Water Coalition. I too want to state that it has been a really good process working with both of the general managers, R and Paret, and staff, and your staff has done a very good job in reaching out to the stakeholders and getting input. We think it has been very constructive, and we too will really appreciate the version that has been put out. We do have still a couple of comments that we will be making, and appreciate R's point about further consideration. I wanted to echo Mr. Versick's comment about the existing costs for funding the existing GEMS program, and how those funds will be either not collected or reallocated. That might help a little bit as far as the potential costs in the future. And then I think it'd be helpful to understand the process for determining the fee and approving it, because my understanding today and what's going to go to the Board of Supervisors is really approving the program and allowing it to move forward. You're not approving the fee because we don't know what that's going to be. So we're going to have a second bite at this apple, I think, and maybe even a third. But I think it'd be helpful if we understood the process for determining that fee and approving it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else?
No hands raised.
All right, here, no more on Zoom, none in the chambers. I'll come back to the board. John?
I just want to echo Nancy's statement, because that's the same question I was going to ask. I just wanted to make it clear that there's no financial obligation on this ordinance that we're approved in front of us today, and that there will be a different procedure for, once the nexus is completed, we'll have a cost analysis of what the program will actually.
That's correct.
Okay.
The ordinance basically sets the authority to utilize a regulatory fee, but the agency is working on a nexus study to nail down what exactly that fee will be, and that will return to you.
Any other board members? All right. Looking for action.
Mr. Chair, I'll move staff's recommendation.
Second?
Who's the second? I'm sorry. Oh, Jason. First with Ken, second with Jason. Roll call, please.
Mike Labar.
Aye.
Matt Simus.
Aye.
Mark Gonzalez.
Aye.
Deirdre Sullivan.
Aye.
Ken Eklund.
Aye.
Mike Scatini. Mike Scatini.
Aye.
Jason Smith.
Aye.
Sean Bailey.
Aye.
Marvin Borzini.
Aye.
And I want to express my great appreciation to staff, for at GSA and the stakeholders for working this together, because that's where we end up with a better product. And so thank you again. Let's move on to key information. We have that under packets. Any questions on the key information side? Let's move to the general manager's report. Ara?
Yeah, quickly, and most notably in the last month, the agency did submit to the county's Human Resources Department our draft compensation philosophy and our proposed wage study scope of work for their review. And so I know they have a lot going on. They did not provide a time frame when they would get back to us, but they do have those documents available for their review now. So another step forward in our efforts there. With respect to staffing specifically, in the last month, have there been no promotions or hires. We are interviewing for the 2 water resource technician positions that opened here recently with departures of 2 individuals. And in terms of priority next recruitments, we remain very interested in looking to establish a maintenance superintendent at the dams, and so that's a JD that we are working to get finalized and out for solicitation. So that's the staff update. I'll pause there.
Run through them.
On dam safety funding, as we've reported in the past, we're in a pretty good spot right now in terms of the design, planning, and construction work we propose to do, both at San Antonio and at Nacimiento. But those grants that we're working off of right now have approximately 3-year lifespans, so we're beginning to think about what the year 4 funding strategy is beginning to look like, especially as it will pertain to the cost for the San Antonio spillway replacement. While 3 years seems like a long time, it will go by quickly. So we recognize we need to reach out to the county and essentially identify the roles and responsibilities of the various entities, the county and the agency, with respect to any potential future indebtedness. The county has played a large role in the past. And so understanding its role in the future is essential to us being able to lay out a sound sort of process in terms of what are the things that the agency is going to have to do to establish itself. Simple example is, do we need to get our own individual credit rating, or can we rely on the counties? Things like that. So we're going to begin that conversation with the county here soon to begin laying out that process. That will inform the steps we have to take. All of that with the intention of being in a position when we get to that year 4, we know what the answer to this question is. We're also working as part of the DWR grant-funded work at Interlake Tunnel, wrapping up the update of the historical benefits analysis. That's in its final stages with the economics report, and very much looking forward to sharing that and getting feedback from stakeholders about it, as that will certainly be a part of the conversation of, how do we fund future dam safety projects. And so that's just kind of a preview of what will be coming in the next couple of months on those issues.
And I do want to add that as you're looking towards that year 4, is also engage with the stakeholders and thinking of what projects, what portion of the dam safety can we accomplish in year 4, and engage them a year or two prior to see, let's do a one of 218 for funding for year 4 projects, one and done. Because that could be another option as we move forward, so we continue that progress. And we're not reliant on somebody, the state or the federal government to give us one huge chunk of money, which is always the hardest, right? So you've been very successful in the piecing out, get this done, grab a little here, get that done, and just working up the pattern. And this could be another tool in the toolbox.
And then on the HBA, how far out do you think it'll be before we start getting stakeholder input? Just so I know, this is a kind of throwing the ball out there.
2 months?
Okay.
Something like that? Definitely just throwing a ball.
Anyone else?
Aqua update with the state legislator and Congress sort of being out on summer recess. It's been quieter there, but at least on the federal side with respect to efforts at Congress to pass the new Water Resource Development Act for 2024. Aqua's been working with a nationwide coalition to support House language that came out of Napolitano's office. Maintaining the water supply be a core mission for the Army Corps. And so that's in the House version, not in the Senate version right now. And so wanting to make sure that that survives. Continuing to look at advocating for, protecting funding or expanding funding for PL 566 projects. But, frankly, the Farm Bill looks stalled. On the state side, Aqua has a sponsored bill that is aimed at aiding public agencies' defense of Prop 218 lawsuits, and then they're in support positions for various sorry, brain gap. And on the Sigma front, they are in an opposed position. On a Prop 218 front, they're on an opposed position on a piece of legislation that would limit fee assessments and enforcements. And with respect to Sigma, they're looking at an opposed position on some legislation that is aimed at preventing extraction limitations in certain subbasins. And so kind of contrary to the purposes of Sigma. And they are hosting a tour, Region 5 tour. We're in Region 5. They are hosting a Region 5 tour upcoming on September 13th of the Pajaro Valley. And then just sort of more generally on regulatory legislative updates, Congress is set to return September 9th. It's going to be a fast and furious legislative session with the upcoming election cycle. Our requests for funding in both the House and the Senate for the CSIP projects, so the well replacement projects and other upgrades did not survive the final stages of the House and Senate approvals before they went to recess at the end of July. So that's unfortunate. Part of the thinking there was we were successful last year and they wanted to spread it around. But so that won't be in the federal appropriations this year. And then in the realm of just kind of watching out for what might be next, the White House has expressed interest in working on a federal policy for groundwater management. I think stakeholders throughout the West have expressed a lot of concern about that. There was a one-day workshop towards the end of July at Arizona State University. The themes were governance and incentives, data gaps and opportunities, and community empowerment and engagement. So stay tuned. The federal government may be getting involved in groundwater. And that concludes my report.
Any board members have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your update. As Hurricane Ernesto was heading up the East Coast over the weekend, I heard on the news that FEMA ran out of money, and so I was wondering if there was a renewed push, maybe legislatively, to say, hey, we basically are counting on the FEMA folks to honor the promise they gave. I mean, do we have any, my question is, do we have any hope of getting any of that money that we're hoping from the winter storms back from FEMA?
I certainly think we have more than hope. And Nan, you might have, would you like to comment on this? We have been working closely with the Office of Emergency Services in terms of tracking FEMA dollars, recently requested an extension on some requests from March of 23, if I'm recalling right. I'll give it to the person who really knows what she's talking about.
For the certain projects that we already have approved for the cost estimate, for example, South Access Road in the Nacimiento Dam, that's already approved 1.1. However, we haven't started we just finished the 90% design phase. So as we incur the expense, we can submit the reimbursement. However, all the expenses already incurred for the emergency response and the summer permanent repairs. However, we haven't received any money yet, except the first advancement we got in March when the storm happened. The state actually issued us about 17 million to the county, and of those 1.4, hopefully our numbers are correct, 1.4 million is our expense. So far, actual money we received is about 1.4, but all the expenses we incurred is almost up to 6 million or so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Ara. We'll now move on to committee reports. So ResOp was canceled. We'll move to BMAC.
BMAC. We talked about recharge, groundwater monitoring, basically the same stuff we talked about today. It was just everything Ara talked about, so it was just a rehash of what our BMAC meeting was last week.
Thank you. All right, Planning Committee was canceled. Personnel and Admin Committee was canceled. Finance.
Finance was, we went over to financials. They all look good. We talked about the hydro revenue and refurbishing Unit 2. And basically, that was it, so.
All right, and then the Joint Water Resource Board of Supervisors Leadership Committee. Matt?
Sure. Last week, we met with Supervisors Lopez and Church and went over the Interlake Tunnel and dam safety projects that Ara just talked about. And then he also gave us an overview of the both the groundwater ordinance as well as the M1W audit that both of which we just approved earlier.
All right, thank you. And for information items, we have our reservoir storage and releases update that was attached to the agenda. Board of Director comments. Jason, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, thank you to staff for continued work and leadership that you guys are providing. I think it's a lot of information for us to take in, but I think the continued transparency and work with our ratepayers and helping understand where we're going is the more transparent we are, the more people understand the buy-in. And I will agree with John and Norm with our regulatory fees and everything that comes down. And I know that we are working together to make those as good as they possibly can be, but it's a bigger problem that I'm not sure any of us are going to fix. So,
Ken, John?
Yep. I want to thank staff. They're overburdened with everything that's on their table. Ara is taking over the juggling from Brent and Kelly, watching all the legal issues. I have to make a comment on what I read over the weekend in one of the local papers. A statement made by a water official that was in my history of being born and raised in this valley, I think was very irresponsible and shouldn't have been made. More careful thought should be given when talking to the press. I have the fortune of taking media training back in Washington, D.C. I was with a group, spent a week doing media training on what you say and what you don't say. And whoever, whether it's the electronic press, written press, or social, and making a statement that was made, just all it does is fuel the fire. And the people that want to believe certain things that the end of the world is near will believe it. We've got to be more careful with what we state to the press. We know what's going on. Nobody knows solely, surely, that from what year are we in? 2024, 2044, 20 years from now, that we will be out of anything. Nobody knows that. Scientists don't even know it. So just, I have to say that when the press asks for comment, calculated answers are always the best and not just off-the-cuff comments. The last paragraph that in the column, it was a great column, except for that. And it incited a lot of comments from people I know of why it was made. And I said, I don't know. That's all I'm going to say. If anything, anybody making a comment should go through training. Otherwise, let the professionals handle the PR work with the press and everybody. So thank you.
Anyone else? Mike?
Yeah, I'd like to echo Director Bailey's comments about that Coast Weekly, August 17th. 2 agencies are working on ways to make groundwater sustainable. And I agree that was not the best of comments to make about that if we don't do anything, we will not have drinking water in 50 years from now. I'd like to remind the public that we have done projects. We have Nacimiento, we have San Antonio, we have CSIP, and we have the Salinas River Diversion Facility. So this valley agriculture, this community has always stepped up to solve problems, and we continue to do so. So screaming that the sky is falling doesn't play into a very good narrative for working with the people that fund all the projects in this valley. Also like to just mention that Ross Clark of the Moss Landing Marine Labs and the Central Coast Wetlands Group has passed away. He was very instrumental in working collaboratively with stakeholders, with different environmental groups and agencies to kind of come together to meet in that happy ground to solve some of the environmental problems that this valley faces. And I personally will miss working with him, and I'm sure many people within our agency as well. So, and his family in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you, Mike. Mark, Matt, anything? All right, with that, we will adjourn at 3:23 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Yeah.